A quiet diner, a stormy night, and a gang that believes they can take whatever they want. But tonight, someone is about to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. When fear no longer controls the town, what happens next? Stay until the end for an unforgettable showdown. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories. The neon lights of the roadside diner flickered against the backdrop of a quiet highway. Inside, the scent of coffee and grilled food lingered in the air, mixing with the low hum of an old jukebox playing a bluesy tune. The customers were few, some truckers, a couple of locals, all minding their own business. Jennifer, the diner's owner, wiped down the counter, forcing herself to ignore the familiar sense of unease settling in her chest. She knew this night wouldn't be different from the others. The bell above the door jingled. Roy stepped in first, his leather jacket damp from the night's drizzle. Behind him, 4 of his men followed, grimy, smug, and reeking of entitlement. The air seemed to shift as conversations dropped to hushed murmurs. Some customers looked away, others lowered their heads, pretending not to notice. They knew what was coming. Jennifer straightened her shoulders, gripping the towel in her hand as the gang approached the counter. Roy smirked, taking his time, rolling a sugar packet between his fingers as if he had all the time in the world. "See, that's where you're wrong," he said, voice smooth, laced with a quiet menace. He flicked the sugar packet onto the counter. "This diner is in our territory, which means you pay if you want to keep it running. That's how things work around here." Jennifer met his gaze, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I told you last time, I'm not giving you a damn cent." Roy sighed dramatically, shaking his head like he was dealing with a stubborn child. He turned to his men. "See, I don't like that attitude. That kind of disrespect gets people into trouble, doesn't it, boys?" One of the bikers, a chipped-toothed brute, grinned as he stepped forward. "Oh yeah, big trouble." The wiry one with the snake tattoo reached over and knocked over a tray of silverware. The loud clatter of knives and forks sent a jolt through the tense silence. Jennifer flinched, her grip tightening on the counter's edge. Across the room, a man who had been quietly sipping coffee set his cup down. His broad shoulders remained relaxed, but there was something about the way he moved, calm, deliberate, like a man who had seen it all before. Seagal had been in the diner before. He had noticed the way customers tensed when the bikers arrived, the way Jennifer's hands trembled ever so slightly after each of their visits. He hadn't interfered before, but tonight was different. Roy leaned in closer to Jennifer, lowering his voice just enough to make the threat personal. "You either pay up or bad things start happening. Windows get broken, fires start, people get hurt." Then he reached for her wrist. He never got the chance to touch her. Seagal moved in an instant. His hand shot out, catching Roy's wrist in an iron grip, stopping him mid-motion. The diner fell into dead silence. The air was thick with anticipation as all eyes turned toward the scene unfolding before them. Roy turned his head slowly, his expression shifting from amusement to something else, realization. His gaze traveled up the arm holding him in place, tracing the thick forearm, the solid shoulders, until his eyes locked onto Seagal's face. Recognition dawned. One of the bikers whispered under his breath, "Holy hell, that's Steven Seagal." Roy's cocky smirk wavered. The diner was deathly quiet. Outside, the rain had started to fall, a distant rumble of thunder rolling over the empty highway. Seagal's voice, when he finally spoke, was low, steady, and carried the weight of a man who had seen too much of the world. "You've had your fun. Now leave." Roy hesitated, his pride warring with common sense. Then his expression darkened, the hesitation vanishing in an instant. He grinned. "You think you can come in here and tell me what to do?" He ripped his wrist free, taking a step back, rolling his shoulders. "All right, boys," he said, his smirk stretching across his scarred face. "Looks like we gotta teach this old-timer a lesson." The bikers spread out, forming a loose semicircle around Seagal. The fight was coming. And Seagal was ready. The diner was silent except for the steady hum of the jukebox still playing that slow blues tune. The other patrons had retreated into their seats, their eyes flickering between Seagal and the bikers, but no one dared to move. The tension in the air was thick, like the charged stillness before a thunderstorm. Rain pattered against the windows. The neon sign outside flickered against the darkness. Roy rolled his shoulders, giving his men room to move in. "You must think you're real tough, huh?" His voice was smooth, but there was an edge of irritation underneath. "A washed-up movie star playing hero?" Seagal remained seated for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the counter as if weighing his options. He had seen men like Roy before. They thrived on fear, on the idea that no one would stand up to them. But he wasn't afraid. He had faced worse things in his life than a group of two-bit thugs shaking down a roadside diner. One of the bikers, the chipped and toothed one, cracked his knuckles and took a step forward. "Think you still got it, old man?" Seagal exhaled slowly and finally stood up. His presence was imposing, his broad shoulders filling the space. He wasn't as young as he once was, but he still had the strength. He still had the instincts. His eyes locked onto Roy, then the rest of the gang, assessing them, the way a predator sizes up its prey. He wasn't looking for trouble, but now that it had found him, he was going to end it. The diner was silent, except for the soft hum of the jukebox playing its slow blues tune. The air was thick with tension as Steven Seagal stood firm, his broad shoulders squared as he faced the gang of bikers. The other patrons had retreated into their seats, their eyes flickering between Seagal and the men who had been terrorizing the place for months. No one dared to move. Outside, the rain pattered against the windows, the neon sign flickering against the darkness. Roy stood at the center, rolling his shoulders, his smirk stretching across his scarred face as he took a step back, giving his men room to move in. "All right, boys," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's show this old man what happens when you mess with us." The first biker, the one with the chipped tooth, lunged forward. His movement was aggressive but sloppy, driven more by arrogance than skill. Seagal sidestepped easily, his movements deceptively fast for a man his age. The biker swung wildly, his fist cutting through empty air as Seagal ducked under it with practiced ease. In one smooth motion, Seagal drove a heavy fist into the man's stomach, folding him like a cheap chair. Before the biker could recover, Seagal grabbed him by the collar and yanked him forward, slamming him face first into the counter. The man groaned, sliding to the floor in a heap. The second biker, the wiry one with the snake tattoo curling up his neck, reached for something at his waist. A flick of his wrist, and a blade gleamed under the dim diner lights. Jennifer gasped behind the counter. "Seagal, watch out!" she called. But Seagal had already seen it. The biker lunged, thrusting the knife forward, aiming for Seagal's ribs. But Seagal caught his wrist mid-motion, twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the floor as the biker let out a pained yell. Seagal followed through, slamming an elbow into the man's jaw, sending him sprawling backward over a table. The table crashed beneath his weight, plates and glasses shattering around him. Roy's smirk was gone. His cocky confidence had been replaced with something else, caution. But he wasn't about to back down. "You idiots," he growled. "Get him!" The third biker, a thick-set man with a beard like steel wool, grabbed a chair and swung it toward Seagal's back. The wood splintered on impact, but Seagal barely flinched. He turned, grabbing the man by the front of his jacket and delivering a thunderous right hook that sent him flying into the jukebox. The old machine crackled, the music cutting off abruptly as sparks flickered from its exposed wiring. Roy clenched his jaw. 3 of his men were down, groaning on the floor. The last one standing hesitated, his hands twitching at his sides. Roy pulled something from his pocket and let it clink against his knuckles. Brass knuckles. He flexed his fingers, rolling his neck before stepping forward. "All right," he muttered. "Guess I gotta handle this myself." Seagal stood firm, his breathing slow and even. He had fought men like Roy before, men who thought weapons made them stronger. They never understood that real strength came from something else entirely. Roy lunged. The brass knuckles whistled through the air, aiming for Seagal's jaw. But Seagal moved at the last second, weaving to the side and letting the punch fly past him. Roy stumbled forward, off balance. Seagal didn't hesitate. He grabbed Roy by the arm, twisted him around, and drove his knee into his stomach. Roy gasped, but Seagal wasn't done. He hooked an arm under Roy's shoulder, lifted him off his feet, and slammed him down onto the counter with a bone-rattling thud. Roy coughed, trying to catch his breath, his body sprawled over the counter. The rest of his men were down, groaning in pain. Seagal straightened, rolling his shoulders before looking around at the wrecked diner. The tables were overturned, shattered glass covered the floor, and the jukebox flickered weakly. Jennifer was frozen behind the counter, her eyes wide. Roy wheezed out a laugh, his voice strained. "You're gonna regret this, old man." Seagal leaned down, his voice calm but unyielding. "No, you're the one who's going to regret it." Then, in the distance, sirens wailed. Roy's eyes flicked toward the window, his expression twisting in frustration. His men were barely able to stand, and now the cops were coming. The neon sign outside flickered as blue and red lights flashed through the rain-speckled window. Jennifer exhaled shakily. "Cops are here." Seagal took a step back as the front door burst open. This time, it wasn't more trouble. It was the law. The diner door slammed open again, but this time it wasn't more trouble. The flashing red and blue lights outside reflected off the rain-slicked pavement, casting an eerie glow through the windows. The wail of sirens faded as 2 police cruisers came to a stop just outside. Heavy footsteps echoed as officers stepped inside, hands resting near their holsters, their eyes scanning the chaos before them. Sergeant Wilson, a tall, broad-shouldered officer with graying hair, took in the scene with a sigh. He was the kind of cop who had seen it all before, and the sight of Roy and his men sprawled across the floor barely seemed to surprise him. He recognized them immediately. His sharp eyes flicked from the broken furniture to the groaning bikers, then finally landed on Steven Seagal, who stood calmly near the counter, arms crossed. Wilson exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temple. Well, he muttered, stepping further inside, "if it ain't Roy Dawson and his boys again." Jennifer was still behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She swallowed, forcing herself to speak. "They came in demanding money. When I refused, they started threatening me. Then they tried to get physical." Wilson barely reacted. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket, flipping it open. "Yeah, that sounds about right." He turned to his partner, a younger officer with a sharp jawline and a serious expression. "Call it in. We're bringing them in for extortion, assault, and destruction of property." Roy let out a low groan from where he lay on the counter. He tried to push himself up, but his body wasn't cooperating. His breath was ragged, pain radiating through his ribs from where Seagal had slammed him down. This is bull," he wheezed. One of his men, the one with the broken nose, nodded weakly. "Yeah, man, we were just minding our own business. Then that guy attacked us." He flicked his gaze toward Seagal, trying to shift the blame. Wilson raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You really expect me to believe that?" Roy sneered, spitting blood onto the floor. "Check the damn cameras. That freak attacked first." Before the officer could respond, a voice from the corner of the diner spoke up. "Actually, I got the whole thing right here." All heads turned toward a young man in a trucker cap sitting near the window. He held up his phone, the screen still recording. "Got every second of it," he continued. "These guys came in harassing the lady, knocking stuff over, calling her all kinds of names, even pulled a knife on him." He gestured toward Seagal. "Man only fought back when they tried to jump him." Wilson stepped forward and took the phone, watching a few seconds of the footage. Slowly, he nodded. "Well, looks like that settles it." He looked down at Roy, who had gone pale. "Anything else you'd like to add?" Roy clenched his jaw, saying nothing. He knew he had lost. Wilson signaled to his officers. "Cuff them." The younger officer moved in, pulling zip ties from his belt and yanking the bikers to their feet one by one. Roy struggled for a moment, but when he winced in pain from the fight, he stopped resisting. The man with the broken nose groaned. "Man, you don't gotta be so rough." "You don't gotta be such a dumbass," Wilson muttered as he secured the zip ties around the biker's wrists. Jennifer watched, her breath still uneven. Wilson glanced at her. "You pressing charges?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Seagal, then back to the sergeant. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but there was something else in them now, something firm, unwavering. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than before. Roy's head snapped up. "What?" Jennifer took a breath. "I should have done it the last time they came in here, but I was scared. Not anymore." Roy's face contorted in rage, but Wilson pushed him forward before he could say anything. "You heard her." He looked over at Seagal. "You need to come down to the station to give a statement." Seagal shook his head. "You got video evidence, witnesses. I think that's enough." Wilson studied him for a second, then nodded. "Fair enough. Appreciate what you did here tonight." Seagal didn't respond. He just gave a small nod as the officers dragged the bikers toward the door. Roy twisted his head to glare at Jennifer. "You're making a mistake, girl. You think this is over? I got people, and they don't like it when one of their own gets locked up." Seagal took a single step forward. Roy immediately shut his mouth, his body tensing involuntarily, remembering the power behind those hands. Seagal leaned down just enough to look him in the eye. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "This is over," he said. "You come near her again, and I won't stop at just putting you through a table." Roy swallowed hard. He believed him. Wilson gave a sharp tug on Roy's cuffs, dragging him out of the diner. One by one, the rest of the bikers were taken outside and stuffed into the back of the cruisers. The sound of the doors slamming shut echoed through the night. Inside the diner, the silence was heavy. The tension had lifted, but the weight of everything that had just happened still lingered. Customers started moving again, some whispering in amazement, others murmuring among themselves. A few people stole glances at Seagal as if still processing that Steven Seagal had just taken down an entire gang in their small-town diner. Jennifer exhaled slowly, running a hand through her curls. She turned to Seagal, her expression a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." Seagal shrugged. "Yeah, I did." She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "You know, you just single-handedly did what I've been too afraid to do for months. Those guys, they've been running this town like it belongs to them. Nobody ever stands up to them." Seagal leaned against the counter. "Well, looks like that just changed." Jennifer studied him for a moment. "Why'd you step in?" Seagal was quiet for a beat before answering. "Because too many people look the other way when this kind of thing happens. I've seen it before. Figured it was about time somebody didn't." Jennifer swallowed, her throat tight. She had spent so long feeling powerless against people like Roy, so long trying to convince herself that as long as she stayed out of their way, she'd be safe. But seeing what had happened tonight, seeing someone refuse to be intimidated, refuse to let them win, made something inside her shift. The diner door swung open again, but this time it was just a customer who had been hiding behind a booth. A woman in her 50s, still clutching her purse, stepped forward. "That was incredible," she murmured. "You really showed them." A man near the window nodded. "Yeah, that was the best thing I've seen all year." Another chuckled. "Forget movies, Seagal. You should do this full time." Seagal smirked, shaking his head. "I'll stick to acting." Jennifer laughed softly, the first real laugh she had let out in what felt like ages. She turned and grabbed a clean coffee mug. "Well, I don't know about you, but I could really use a cup of coffee." Seagal chuckled, sliding into his booth again. "You know what? I think I'll have that burger now." Jennifer grinned, already moving toward the kitchen. Outside, the police cars pulled away, their sirens off, but their presence still lingering in the air. The night was quieter now, calmer. The town didn't feel as small anymore. And inside the diner, things finally started to feel right. The diner had finally started to return to normal, but the damage left behind was impossible to ignore. Shattered glass and broken furniture were scattered across the floor, and several booths had been overturned during the fight. The jukebox, which had been playing moments before, now sat at an awkward angle against the wall, its wires exposed where the impact had knocked it loose. The neon "open" sign flickered unsteadily in the window, struggling to stay lit after one of the bikers had been thrown into it. Jennifer moved carefully through the wreckage, picking up overturned chairs and gathering broken plates. The adrenaline from the fight had worn off, leaving her feeling drained but strangely light. She had spent so many nights dreading encounters like this, flinching every time the bell over the door rang. But tonight had been different. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could finally breathe. Steven Seagal was still seated at his booth, his meal untouched but no longer forgotten. His hands rested on the table, fingers loosely curled around the coffee mug that Jennifer had given him after the fight. He had barely taken a sip. Instead, he watched her, his expression unreadable as she worked. "You don't have to do that," he finally said. Jennifer glanced up from where she was kneeling, sweeping up pieces of a broken salt shaker. "Somebody's got to clean this place up," she said, forcing a small smile. "Might as well be me." Seagal nodded, but didn't look convinced. He leaned back against the seat, exhaling slowly. You okay?" She stopped what she was doing for a second, fingers tightening around the broom handle. Was she okay? She wasn't sure. She had faced down those bikers before, but this time, things had escalated further than she had ever imagined. They had threatened her before, pushed her around, but never had they been taken down so brutally. "I think so," she said eventually. She looked at him, really looked at him. "I should be asking you that. Those guys weren't exactly pulling their punches." Seagal smirked slightly, rolling his shoulder. "I've had worse." Jennifer shook her head, muttering under her breath. "Of course you have." The front door creaked open again, and she stiffened instinctively. But this time, it wasn't another threat. Instead, a few of the customers who had hidden during the fight started emerging from their booths, cautiously stepping forward. Some still looked wary, their eyes darting toward the door as if expecting the bikers to come storming back in. But others looked at Seagal with something else in their expressions: relief, admiration, maybe even hope. One of the truckers, a grizzled older man with a thick gray beard, crossed his arms over his chest. "Hell of a thing you did, son," he said, his voice gruff but approving. "Ain't never seen nobody put those bastards in their place like that." A woman near the counter, still clutching her purse, nodded. "They've been shaking people down for years. No one ever stands up to them. We all just let it happen." Jennifer swallowed hard. She knew it was true. The bikers had run this part of town like they owned it, demanding money from businesses, terrorizing the people who refused to pay up. Most folks had just learned to live with it, avoiding conflict, keeping their heads down. Seagal didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked around at the faces watching him, studying the mix of fear and relief. Finally, he exhaled through his nose and sat forward, resting his elbows on the table. "That's how they keep control," he said. "They make you feel like there's nothing you can do, like standing up to them isn't worth it." The trucker nodded. "Yeah, and sometimes it ain't. Not when they got numbers like they do." "But they're not invincible," Jennifer said suddenly, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. She set down the broom, looking around the diner. "They act like they own this place, but they don't. And if people stop being afraid of them, if more of us fight back, maybe they'll realize that." Silence followed her words, heavy and thoughtful. Seagal gave her a small nod, like he approved of what she was saying. "You're right." The trucker let out a low chuckle. "Guess the question is, what happens now?" Jennifer hesitated. That was the real question, wasn't it? The bikers were gone for now, but Roy's parting words still echoed in her mind. "You think this is over? I got people." She forced herself to push down the lingering fear. "Now I file a report, press charges, and hope the cops actually do their job." "Hope's a funny thing," Seagal murmured. Jennifer met his gaze. "You don't think it'll be enough?" Seagal sighed, running a hand over his jaw. "I think it's a good start, but guys like Roy, they don't just disappear because they get arrested once. He's gonna be pissed. And if he's got people like he says, they'll be coming." The words settled over the diner like a weight. The woman at the counter swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Seagal glanced around the room. "You don't let fear win," he said simply. "If they come back, you stand together. You don't let them push you around anymore." The trucker snorted. "Easier said than done." Seagal's expression hardened slightly. "It's not about what's easy. It's about what's right." The silence stretched between them. But this time, it wasn't heavy with fear. It was heavy with determination. Jennifer nodded slowly, turning back to the counter. Then I guess I better make that call. She picked up the diner's old landline and dialed the police station. The line rang twice before a dispatcher picked up. "This is Jennifer Blake from the roadside diner on Carson Street," she said, her voice steady. "I'd like to file a formal complaint against Roy Dawson and his crew. Extortion, property damage, assault." She met Seagal's eyes as she spoke, the weight of what she was doing settling fully in her chest. But this time she wasn't afraid. This time she wasn't alone. Seagal watched her for a moment before finally lifting his coffee cup and taking a long sip. "About time," he muttered under his breath. The diner wasn't fixed, but something had changed tonight, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, things would be okay. The air in the diner felt different now. The tension that had filled the space just an hour ago had started to dissolve, replaced by something else, something quieter, heavier. The immediate threat was gone. The bikers were in police custody, and yet the weight of what had happened still lingered in the air like the scent of burnt coffee. Jennifer stood behind the counter, the phone still in her hand after speaking with the police, her fingers gripping the receiver a little too tightly. She had done it. She had pressed charges. She had finally taken a stand. But the fear in her chest hadn't disappeared completely. If anything, it had simply changed shape. Steven Seagal was still seated at his booth, his broad frame relaxed, though his sharp eyes took in every detail of the room. He had seen situations like this before, people thinking the battle was over when, in reality, it was just beginning. Roy's words echoed in his head. "I got people, and they don't like it when one of their own gets locked up." It wasn't an empty threat. He could feel it in his gut. But the question wasn't if Roy's crew would retaliate, it was when. The other patrons of the diner had started moving again, some gathering their things, others murmuring in hushed voices. A few approached Jennifer to offer words of encouragement, but most of them simply nodded in her direction, their eyes filled with something that looked like relief. They had seen her stand up to them. They had seen Seagal take them down. And now, for the first time in a long time, maybe there was hope. Jennifer exhaled and set the phone down, rubbing her temples. She felt exhausted, her body still buzzing with the leftover adrenaline from the fight, but her mind was already racing ahead to what might come next. She turned to look at Seagal. "You really think they'll come back?" Seagal met her gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yeah," he said simply. Jennifer swallowed hard. She had expected that answer, but hearing it out loud made her stomach twist. "Great," she muttered, grabbing a rag and mindlessly wiping down the counter. "Just what I needed." Seagal watched her for a moment, then leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "You afraid?" Jennifer let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Of course I'm afraid. Those guys have been running this place like their own personal kingdom for years. They don't just let things go." She shook her head. "Roy's the worst of them, but he's not the only one. And if he's got people outside of town like he says—" She trailed off, her grip tightening on the rag. Seagal nodded, his expression serious. "You did the right thing pressing charges." "I know," Jennifer said, but her voice was quieter now. She glanced toward the broken furniture, the shattered glass still glinting under the dim lights. "Doesn't mean it won't cost me." Seagal understood. He had seen this before. The fight wasn't just about throwing punches. It was about standing up when it was easier to back down. It was about refusing to live in fear, even when fear was the easier choice. He had learned that lesson a long time ago, and now he could see Jennifer learning it too. The bell above the diner door jingled, and both of them tensed slightly. But it wasn't trouble this time. 2 officers stepped inside, the younger one from earlier and an older man who had the tired look of someone who had seen too much of the world. They scanned the room before approaching Jennifer. "You the one who called in the charges?" the older officer asked. Jennifer straightened. "Yeah, that was me." The officer gave her a nod. "Good. We've been after Roy and his crew for a while now, but nobody ever wanted to go on record. Your statement, plus the footage from that guy's phone, might actually make it stick this time." Jennifer felt something loosen in her chest, but she didn't let herself relax just yet. "So they're really being charged?" "Oh, yeah," the officer confirmed. "Roy's looking at multiple counts of extortion and assault. The others, same deal. We'll see how much of it holds in court, but they won't be walking free anytime soon." For the first time that night, Jennifer let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The younger officer glanced at Seagal, his expression shifting slightly. "And you," he said, almost cautiously. "Not every day we see a guy like you getting involved in something like this." Seagal shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. The officer let out a low chuckle. "Well, whatever the case, you sure made an impression." He glanced at the broken furniture. "And one hell of a mess." Jennifer winced, looking around at the destruction. "Yeah, the owner's not going to be happy about this." "You the manager?" the older officer asked. "No," she said, then hesitated. "But the owner barely comes around. I practically run the place at this point." The officer nodded. "You let us know if those guys come back. We'll keep an extra patrol near here for the next few weeks, just in case." Jennifer didn't know how much that would help, but it was something. As the officers left, the diner settled into a strange kind of quiet. The remaining customers finished their meals, some still throwing glances at Seagal like they couldn't believe he was actually here. Jennifer sighed and leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. "I think I'm going to need about 3 days' worth of sleep after this." Seagal smirked. "You and me both." She looked at him again, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Why'd you do it?" Seagal raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" She gestured vaguely to the wreckage around them. "Step in, fight to them, risk getting hurt. You didn't owe me anything." Seagal was silent for a moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Because I've seen too many people let fear win," he said finally, "and I'm tired of it." Jennifer swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She thought about all the time she had stayed silent, all the time she had let them walk all over her because she was too afraid to fight back. "Yeah," she said quietly, "me too." Seagal studied her for a second before nodding. "Good." She shook her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You're something else, Seagal," he smirked. "So I've been told." Jennifer let out a breath, looking around the diner one more time. It was a mess. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a place she was trapped in. It felt like a place worth fighting for. And she had a feeling she wasn't the only one who thought so. Justice has been served, but is the battle really over? Would you have stood up against them? Let's talk in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing our viewers from all over the world. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps us create more powerful stories that deserve to be told.